following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Nats, Senators, Twins, baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we have a semi-full house this morning. George Case is here. How you doing, George?
Just fine, thank you.
David Hubler.
Good morning, all.
Morning, sir. And Gene, the Yankee-hating machine is here. How are you, Gene?
I'm just fine because Cole's going to the Astros.
Well,
just you wait.
Load up the American League.
Just
Gene
you
Hubmaker,
wait.
by the way. That's who it is. You guys want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, from what I'm reading in the paper today, the Yankees are looking more toward Yu Darvish and believe they can get him at a better deal than if they had to the Pirates.
Okay. Mixed reviews on him over the years, too.
Yeah, and last year he didn't have a very good playoffs, but that lowers the price. The Yankees are still trying to get in under the luxury tax limit this year, and they could swing a deal to get Darvish. It's a tricky numbers game, actually.
Interesting. New York Yankees, bargain hunters. just doesn't roll off the lips.
No, it's a new era.
Yes.
They used to call Steinbrenner's team the best team that money can buy.
That's right.
Right. Well, and sometimes money doesn't buy the best teams. That's just got to keep that in mind. Somebody joined us.
Hi, it's Tony.
Hey, Tony D'Angelo. Tony is our godfather of the station, and he's joining us. This is the Washington Nats Senators, Twins, all those teams that we pay homage to on Sunday. Thanks for joining that show, Tony. Specifically, you're here because we want to honor the late Keith Jackson, who passed away earlier in the week. And Tony has a few words to say, and then we're going to go around the room. The man had to have meant a lot to all of us individually. Anybody who ever turned on a college football game in the 80s has to remember Ramblin', all that stuff. Tony D'Angelo on Keith Jackson.
Well, I think of Keith Jackson. He was really the first of the three reporters or three anchors on Monday Night Football. And he never, from what I understand, he never was really thoroughly happy in that role. I mean, he did it, but he, as you explained, Zig, I mean, he was Mr. College Football and had such a character that he brought to the game, and it was just such a color. And like earlier on, we were talking about Curt Gowdy, which, you know, every time when I was a kid growing up in the greater New York City metropolitan area, yeah, there was the Yankee games and the Met games, and believe me, they were great broadcasts. I don't mean to trivialize them. But when you heard Curt Gowdy on a Saturday or in a World Series, you just knew you were being drawn into something special. And Keith Jackson had that quality. Vince Scully had that quality. Jack Buck had that quality. But sad fact of the matter is I don't think there's anybody today that has that same quality.
Yeah, I just ran it through my head. Nobody out there stands out like fellows like Keith Jackson did. We're losing a whole bunch of them in a short period of time.
You know, I think Dick Enberg just died this past week too. So you lost, you know, two major broadcasting icons in Enberg and Keith Jackson.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wonder who will think. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, David Hubler.
Oh.
As as we go around the room, what Keith Jackson meant to you or your memories of him.
Yeah, well, I think because I didn't watch all that much Saturday college football, but when I did, there was a very reassuring quality about him. A sort of almost
Good way to
a
describe
bit.
him.
Yeah, a bit of, and also a bit of an irreverent tone. I mean, he was not. I'm thinking of what's his name, who did all those basketball games and was such a horrendous loudmouth.
Vitale?
Dick Vitale.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. But Jackson maintained a coolness, he showed a reverence for the game, especially when there were remarkable plays made. Because don't forget, these were 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. They were not the pros, but he like Marty Glickman, made it an event each time that I watched. That was my takeaway.
For certain, Lindsey Nelson was also very similar in the fact of I really thought with Lindsey Nelson, even though for all the great Met broadcasts he gave us, his real love was college football. He seemed to be the most excited with that, even though he did get pretty excited when he was broadcasting Tom Seaver's games. But there's just a quality there that, I wish I could explain it to people. I give them examples, and I say, this is really what it's like, and they look at me like I've got six heads. Must be my agent's state.
No, a lot of these announcers have Southern roots. Red Barber.
Yes.
And
Dizzy Dean.
Southern twang, that charm that could spin a tale, if you will.
Dizzy Dean came from the South. Mel Allen had a Southern twang to him.
Right.
I'm trying to think of any others, but
yeah, for New York kids that talk like this, we sit and learn a little that things are regionalized. Now, I think what with television and what have you, you don't get regional accents as much as you did in the past.
You do not.
Yeah, you do not. And everybody tries to be Vin Scully. That every new announcer that I hear, who basically was a lot like Red Barber, if I'm remembering Red properly. You guys can help me there, but I thought their styles were very similar, Vin Scully and Red Barber.
Ralph, you mentioned two names there, and I have a little bit of an association. In 1943, my dad was on the American League All-Star game and All-Star team, and I have the original broadcast of that game, which I didn't know existed until about a year ago. And Red Barber and Mel Allen were two of the broadcasters of that game on the network in 1943. And then in 1975, I had the great good fortune of actually meeting Mel Allen, who was the featured speaker in 1975 when my dad was honored by the city of Trenton, New Jersey. And I have a photograph of Mel and my father, and also a signed portrait that was given to my dad by the people that put the dinner together. And Mel, I'll never forget his opening statement that night as the keynote speaker. He said, I could have been a lot of places tonight, but I wanted to be here to honor George Case. And I'll always remember that. And just a wonderful guy. And you're talking about that Southern accent. I believe Mel was from Alabama.
Yeah,
and,
that's right. Yes.
Right. And so he and Red Barber certainly did have something in common with their, a little bit of a Southern draw.
He started out life as Melvin Allen
Israel. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. I got his autograph once. When I was at Voice of America, I worked with one of the producers who also produced his This Week in Baseball. Remember, he did the narrations on This Week in Baseball.
Right. Yes.
And the whole second career for him.
Yeah, it was, and I was thrilled to that I was working with the same producer that was working with Mel Allen because I grew up with Mel Allen on the radio, and so I said one day, I said, would you just ask him for an autograph, please? And I did get the autograph. I have it here, and it was very nice. It was more than just Mel Allen. The little inscription there too. So I've always had fond memories of Mel Allen, and the saddest thing for me was when he broke down during the '63 World Series when the Dodgers squeaked out a victory against the Yankees in the series, and Koufax had a rather good series, and he was crying, just about crying on the air, and they let him go after that, which I thought was terrible tragedy, because some of the other announcers were real home cookers. I'm thinking of and in New York you were not supposed to do that. I mean, I'm talking about
it was not the Yankee way.
Yeah, it was not. Well, no, it would also the Giants and the Dodgers the same thing. These guys,
that's right,
considered themselves, objective. Well, at least they performed as objective observers. They weren't the kind of guys you saw. Some of the guys in the Midwest, and I'm thinking particularly of what's his name at the Dusty White Sox game. Well, Harry, yeah, but he was a character into his own self. But I'm thinking of
Bob Prince was that way, Dave.
That was
the Pirates.
Yeah. What's his name? In Chicago.
He really was a home cooker.
Yeah. Some of these guys, if you're not from that city, it's hard to listen to some of them. Now
Hawk Harrelson, I think, is the...
Hawk Harrelson, that's the guy. I mean, right. Vince Scully bled Dodger blue, but he didn't bleed it on the air. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Mel was tremendous during
Randy. But, Vince Scully grew up as a Giant fan.
Yes.
He was went to Fordham. He rooted for Mel Ott, fervorously rooted for Mel Ott, and he became. I think he smiled about it at the end. He did his last broadcast on the road up at AT&T Park in San Francisco, doing the Giants when they played the Dodgers. So we may never really know what his rooting habits were in the big games when the Giants played the Dodgers, but we do know that he was the voice of baseball for the past 20 years, and that his voice has gone from the airwaves. Really, people don't talk about it much, but didn't talk about it much this year. But he's missed, no question.
Oh, for certain. For certain.
Yeah. And, part of that is that these guys, like Vince Scully and Mel Allen, they grew up on the air with their team. And in those days, and George will verify this, these teams traveled by train. And so they had lots of time to become friendly. There were card games between the players and the sports writers, and probably some of the announcers as well. So in that sense, they bonded, as opposed to a 2-hour or 3-hour flight on a plane. So, I'm not saying that the announcers today don't have an affection for their team, and sometimes more than that. But in the days of radio and the war years, they traveled a lot more together, and they grew closer that way.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you, David. They certainly did. And one recent picture I just saw, as you're talking about that, about a writer, I just saw a picture yesterday. I think it was on Facebook of Lou Gehrig and Bob Considine on a train together. And that's a prime example of a sports writer, nationally acclaimed sports writer. The broadcasters did the same thing. As you mentioned, they did travel on the train, and some of those train rides was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. A Western trip from New York or Washington out to St. Louis. That was a long ride, and
that was an overnight trip. That was
it was, and they got a chance to really know one another, and a lot closer relationship between the players and the writers and the broadcasters as existed back then.
For sure. Phil Rizzuto would talk about that a lot, talking to DiMaggio during the train trips, and how much fun he had and how much he got to understand the players and learned a lot about baseball and all the stories he told. He said, well, like when he was with Bill White, he'd be like, White, I used to hear this on the train.
That's exactly right, Tony. Tony, that's the way it was. Absolutely.
And while it sounds almost romantic to be on those long distance trains, they had upper lower bunks. They didn't have the accommodations that the players do now in the hotels, where they're shuttled to the hotel and they're treated in first class style. And I believe they don't even room together anymore on the road. I believe they all have their own
I
room.
believe they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the old days when my dad was playing, and Gene will attest to it with the Yankees, and the Cardinals, the players, no matter what their status, they were roommates, and that's what they did when they were on the road. And I know my father used to laugh because when my dad was playing, Ken Chase was a pitcher for Washington, and the traveling secretary used to love to room the two of them together, Chase and Case, because they would get confused on messages, who was getting whose message, and that's the way they did it. It was a different world than what you have today, where, guys are probably in single luxury suites and all this other kind of stuff. Back then they were bunking in together.
Yeah,
hey,
and that
Tony
lasted
will
until...
attest to this. The Mets had two Bob Millers, both pitchers, one a lefty, one a righty, and they roomed together for a while. And they would get each other's messages, and I remember hearing stories about confusion from that. So, yes, roommates were very common and the norm, and now you don't hear about that at all.
No, when I went to interview Bobby Richardson for the first time when he was a rookie, I went to the old Concourse Plaza Hotel on the Grand Concourse, which you used to be able to see up the hill from Yankee Stadium.
Yes.
And he was rooming there with Tony Kubek, and so they were still rooming. That was like 1959, somewhere around 58, 59.
A little earlier if he was a rookie.
Well, I think it came up 58 or 59. It had to have been that time. But anyway, they were still rooming in those days. But, of course, that wasn't even on the road. That was at home. I guess it was before they found their own accommodations.
Oh, yeah.
There's that motel, which you can still see. It's not a motel anymore. I think it's a community nonprofit off the Major Deegan. You could see it very well if you're going down to Major Deegan or if you're taking the train. It was the I'm trying to think. It was the
I know which one you mean.
Motor Inn. That was the name of it, and that was.
What was the? I'm sorry, I spoke over you. What was the name?
Oh, the Bronx Motor Inn, or the Bronx Motor Lodge, I think more specifically. Mm-hmm. And Tony Kubek and Bill Stafford and several other single Yankees lived in that motel for the entire 61 season, and they would walk the street to the stadium and walk back. This is unbelievable. and meet fans and talk with them and sign autographs and take pictures, and try doing that today.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
They would charge for the autographs.
Yeah, right.
As kids, we always remember the players that signed and the players that didn't sign if we went for autographs.
Yes, yes.
That's what they...
I'll ask Gene.
Yeah.
Anybody you went down for autographs when you were a kid that was nice to you, and anybody that wasn't nice to you?
Well, we went to a old timers game in '57 when Marty Marion was the manager of the White Sox, and he wasn't too good about giving autographs at Yankee Stadium. But once I explained who I was, he readily gave me one.
Oh. Told him you were a Yankee at age what, 10?
Probably maybe a little 11 or 12, and I started reciting his stats as being the MVP in '44, and his nickname the Octopus, and Slaps Marion, and right away he readily signed.
You know what, Gene and everybody, when you mentioned that about signing, I can remember just as a little child, I'd come out of the Washington clubhouse with my dad. If he'd had a good game and the fans were there, my dad was very happy to sign, no problem with a good game. If he had a bad game, he would sign, but he wasn't too happy about it, I can tell you that.
Well, you go back to those, maybe not the early Mets, but the mid-generation Mets like Kranepool, McGraw, Seaver, Jim McAndrew, Harrelson. I would go to games on Sundays, and these guys would stand all along the third base boxes and sign and sign and sign. And McGraw was the best. He'd take pictures and pose for pictures, and they were just like somebody told him. I think it was Ron Swoboda. He said, "You really were the babysitter for the greater New York metropolitan area." And he said, "Well, more so McGraw than I, but that's just the kind of guys that they were." And it's just you miss that. I do.
Yeah, and I think the players themselves, even the ones that do sign and things like that, don't realize the impact that they make on
the impression.
Yes. Yeah. I can distinctly remember a game I went to at the Polo Grounds, and I was standing right behind, just off to the right of the screen, while Johnny Antonelli was warming up. And I said, "Come on, throw me a ball, throw me a ball." And he said to me, you don't hear this today anymore, but he said, "If I throw it to you, promise you'll throw it back." And I said, "Yes." And as that ball was coming to me, I was scared stiff that I was going to drop it, and fortunately I caught it and I threw it back to him. And to this day, I've never gotten a ball in a baseball game. That was the closest I've ever come. And I threw it back.
Good for you.
But I remember, so many years later, I remember that.
That would make an impression, that's for sure. Man.
I have a story that
generation of the autographs when cars were going out. And I could remember I have a friend who was an avid collector, and he has a visual difficulty, so I drove him from Bridgeport, Connecticut to the Meadowlands. This is about 18, 19 years ago, to get Willie Mays' signature on a ball that he himself had, where he had Duke Snider and Mickey Mantle's signature. He wanted the three New York center fielders on one ball. They were all alive at that time. And I'll tell you, Willie was not having a good day. He acknowledged no one. His head was down. People would say, "Hey, I saw you in this game." He'd just grunt. Looked like he didn't want to be there. And, speaking of, quote unquote impressions of autograph people, when people mention Willie Mays, that's the first thing that pops into my head, even though, Willie's a very complex guy, but that was the Willie I saw on that day.
Did he sign it?
Oh yeah, he did. Well, it was paid autographs, so he signed, and people were bringing things and pictures of the Polo Grounds, and he was not the least bit engaging. Whereas maybe 2 weeks before, we had gone to see Duke Snider, who was the nicest, most pleasant person you'd ever want to run into, wanted to get the inscription exactly right, and he was thankful. "Thank you for coming to see me." And, I personally, I just kind of wish Willie could have been more like that day.
I'm sure Mrs. Mays wishes he could have been more like that.
We still have that impression, though. If you remember those years of Willie Mays playing stickball in the streets of Harlem with kids after the game. So the image of Willie Mays is a positive one.
Yes, it is.
Although, in fact, I had a personal experience with Willie Mays. In the mid '80s, they had a Crackerjack Old Timers All-Star game at RFK Stadium. They were trying to drum up interest in bringing a team back into the Washington area. And this was the first year they had all these great All-Stars. I've got a picture of DiMaggio and myself in the dugout, and they had top-notch players. The Mays came late to the game, and I was on the field covering the game. And this was one of those games where the press was allowed to, schmooze with the players and collect autographs. You don't do that the normal circumstances. But anyway, I forget who it was who had signed in the sweet spot. And when Mays came, and he came late, as I said, dressed up and came out on the field and began signing some autographs, he was really upset that in the ball I had, the sweet spot was already taken, and he didn't want to sign it. I mean, if it was, and I think it might have been signed by the manager. I forget. My son has it now. But the impression I was left with was, come on, it's just a baseball. You don't have these. Yeah. You came late. It was your fault.
Yeah,
but it was not a good impression.
Autograph collector friend that he went to Reggie Jackson signing and had Reggie sign an object, and Reggie was. Reggie that day was Reggie, and somebody else came and asked Reggie, would you please sign the ball here, Mr. Jackson, because I have another player's signature, I forget who it was, on the sweet spot, as you say. And Reggie just looked at him and signed his name right over the other player. And
oh, wow.
Couple of cheers.
That sounds like Reggie, all right.
Yeah.
It was not a happy scene, I can tell you that much.
Hey, guys, I have an autograph story for you. And if I've told this to any of you before, please excuse me. I know I've told it on these airwaves. In the old days, when Bill Russell played, he was famous for not signing autographs at all, even for his teammates. And I had a sport magazine picture of Bill Russell taking a hook shot with his elbow in Dolph Shays' face. And Dolph Shays was my favorite player as a kid, NYU guy, this, that, and the other thing. And I go down to the hotel the Celtics were in. I don't know which hotel. I don't even remember. It was 4 or 5 blocks from the Garden. And all the Celtics are there. Russell wasn't signing for anybody. Their walk-in was Russell and Embry walking towards the Garden. And I'm like 11, 12, actually a little older, 14 or 15. And I've got this picture of Dolph Shays and Bill Russell. And Bill Russell would also habitually be very nervous before games. And he would throw up, literally, in the locker room. That's how they knew he was ready to play. Before a game, he would do that. And so he was not a happy guy walking to the Garden. He was, head down, just walking. And I saddle up next to Embry, big old Cincinnati Royal former player. Our back would pick up all these old guys at the end of their career, like Willie Knowles, and have them sit on the bench. And anyway, I'm walking and I say, Mr. Russell, I know you're in a hurry to get to the game, but you're playing the Knicks tonight. And Charlie Tyree is the center, and you don't have to be nervous. You don't have to throw up or anything because it's only the Knicks. And he looks at me and cackles. He just laughed out loud. And I said, Mr. Russell, would you mind signing an autograph given that your elbow is in the face of another Jew boy on this? And he laughs again. And he looks at it, and damned if he doesn't start to write. And damned if I don't ask him, would you sign it to Ralph, please, to Ralph with best wishes, please? And he looks up at me again, and he just kind of shakes his head, and he wrote his autograph to Ralph, Bill Russell. I had a woman friend decoupage it on a piece of wood for me. And I still have that thing today. I've lost a lot of possessions over the years, but I still have that, and proud of it. And there you go.
Wow, that's a great story.
Well, I know there's the story, and I've mentioned this before in our discussion groups on Facebook, but I had a friend who went to Christian Brothers High School with Stan Musial's kids, and it was a Catholic boys' high school in St. Louis. And Stan, in the morning, Stan being good guy, good father, wanted his kids to get an education, would have breakfast with his kids, and then would load them into the car, the smoke gray Cadillac, and with cardigan, sweater, and pipe, would drive the kids to the school. And he'd drive them early because all the other kids wanted to come and the priests and the nuns and talk baseball with Stan, which they did like every morning when he was able to do this for like 25, 30 minutes till the bell rang. And, of course, Stan pulled no punches, talked about Hemus, talked about the other players, never anything derogatory. And it's like, don't call me Mr. Musial, call me Stash. It's like, this is the type of guy he was. And I just wish there was more people like that, because what an impression that makes on kids.
Oh, well, yeah. Gene Hutmaker can elaborate on Stan Musial. Gene has the Cardinal program on this station, and Stash is how they referred to Stan Musial in those days. Gene.
Yes, well, my mother was Polish, and she was known as Stasha. So growing up, reading the paper, I'd read the paper early in the morning from the time I was able to, like 8, 9 years old. And what's Stash do today? And I used to go to the baseball assistance team dinner at the Marriott Marquis in New York. And for 2 years, I was with Sally Hemus. And we talked about the 1952-53 team when he was playing, and also when he was manager. One thing about the baseball assistance team, we were talking about autographs. And Darryl Strawberry was sitting with actually he was my second baseman on a tournament team. He's an NFL attorney with Goodell. But anyway, he was sitting at Darryl Strawberry's table, and Darryl Strawberry would sign the ball or whatever, DS. He would not sign Darryl Strawberry like he does for the ones that he gets paid for.
Huh. Well,
they were everybody was complaining about that. Just put DS on it.
Yeah, well, he's had a troubled past, to say the least.
Well, let me give you one more autograph story, and it isn't even an autograph story. I was the Topps baseball representative on the West Coast back in the 80s, and I would cover the Northwest League and the California League, specifically looking for players who didn't have their Topps contract signed. They were entry-level leagues that players would come into out of high school, out of college. Topps would sign them to contracts so that when and if they reached the big leagues, Topps would have their permission to use that name. And back and forth, the players would be compensated down the road. They'd sign a $5 check. Now everybody would do that. They made the big leagues. They'd make big money. Long story short, it's already been a long story. Dave McMurray, I don't know if that name rings a bell to anybody. He was a player that hit a home run in his first big league at bat, and never had a Topps card. He was the manager of the Stockton team, that an A team, that A-level team that Gary Sheffield played for, and I went there early to catch Sheffield and a few other players who hadn't yet signed their contract, and do my thing. And I get there early. I meet Dave McMurray, and he is a terrific guy. As a matter of fact, he's been a guest on this show. This is 35 years later, and he's been a guest on this show. Longtime baseball lifer, minor league manager, and we're talking about the fact that he gets up to the big leagues, hits a home run, but for one reason or another, Topps never put out a card on him. He was never on the original 40-man roster to start the team. Point being, he was very very sad about this. He was regretful he never had a Topps card. And we're talking about life and baseball. He's 40-something at that time. I'm about 40 at that time. And in walks Gary Sheffield. Talk about a new age of doing things. It isn't just today. This has happened surely. And Matt says, Gary, come over here a second. I'd like you to meet Ralph Tycho with Topps. He's here to talk to you about, and right in the middle, Gary Sheffield. Fuck that. I ain't talking to nobody. And he walks off. And just walks away. And this is his manager, that matchman. And we looked at each other, and he just was so embarrassed for that's his charge, so to speak. And I said, don't worry about it. Life is, people are what they are. He was the only player all the years I did Topps for 13 years, talked to hundreds of players in groups, individually. No one was that much of an asshole. I mean, no one. But not because he didn't sign the contract, because he didn't have the courtesy to say, hello, nice to meet you. I don't want to sign the contract. This, that, or the other thing. Kiss my ass, do this, whatever. He looked through both of us. It was, we were flabbergasted. I'll never forget that moment. I reminded Match of that when we talked on the phone. He says, "Oh yeah, that was chilling for humanity." So when he's up for the Hall of Fame and doesn't make it, you might have some idea why. The numbers are there, the personality. He was the same way with writers all through his career, I'm sure, because people are what they are. They don't suddenly change.
Well, at least you feel you could be like George Hendrick, where if you didn't like the writers, you just went in the back and hid in the trainer's room. You didn't come out and make your feelings known. You just hid in the corner. This guy would just antagonize people.
Right.
Man, oh man.
So let's get to the topic, guys, of the day. I don't want to put it off again. We talked part one last time. We're going to talk a little bit about small ball versus long ball. George and David were talking. The conversation got around to other things, and the topic wasn't complete. So, George, would you finish us off on long ball?
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to, Ralph. We're talking, and I know with Gene on the line as well. But my whole point about small ball, long ball was the fact that when my dad played in Washington, because of the size of Griffith Stadium, the left field line was 405 feet, and virtually no right-handed power for the Senators at all. Occasionally they would get some left-handers who were pretty good hitters, but right field was about 330 or 340 with about a 40-foot wall. But if you were a power hitter, you could hit one out, but very few home runs were ever hit at Griffith Stadium other than Mickey Mantle's gargantuan, home run against Chuck Stobbs, but very few home runs were ever hit to left field at Griffith Stadium. And so Washington was forced to play really small ball, which meant the fact that they had speed, good defense, and pitching, and that's the game they had to play. When the Senators finally got some, then the team was about ready to head out to Minnesota, and you had players like Killebrew and Allison and Lemon, and before that, he never played in Minnesota, but he really brought the home run to Washington, was Roy Sievers, and they moved the left field line in from about 405 to I think 350, created what they call the beer garden, and Washington became a long ball hitting team. So, and Gene there, the Yankees were always a long ball hitting team with Ruth and Gehrig and Mantle and DiMaggio and Maris and all those great players. And then another team that played both long ball and small ball, but small ball very much so was the Cardinals because they had the great Lou Brock. So, it's a little bit different game. Today the guys get up there and they're swinging for the fences on a 0-2 pitch, and it doesn't seem to matter then if they're going to strike out or whatever. But in an earlier time, small ball was very important. If you had a leadoff guy, you got him on first, got him to scoring position in second, and then you scored. And that was the way the game was played. So that's what I really wanted to mention. And David, because of Washington and your background, and Gene, and with the Yankees, it's a little bit different game. Small ball versus long ball, proponents of both. I think it was Earl Weaver said that he would rather have long ball because you get 3 runs on a 2-run home run, which was something that he believed in. But on the other hand, a lot of the managers, if they had a team that had to play small ball, they would be very happy to come out with a 1-0 win.
Yeah, excuse me. I think the stats show that if you get that leadoff batter to second base, his chances of scoring are greater than if the leadoff batter had made out and then the next couple of batters. So getting that leadoff hitter to second, and of course what you're saying, George, also goes along with the whole theory of bunting.
Right.
You don't find too many people bunting anymore. Rizzuto was a great bunter.
Yes, he was.
It's sad to see some of these guys come up and are told to bunt, and they don't know the first. They don't. They can't. They don't know how to even hold the bat properly.
I agree with you, David. It drives me crazy. I've made a mention before. I mean, I'm more of a traditionalist, but one of the earliest things I learned to do, because my dad was a good bunter, he taught me how to bunt. And when I see guys today, I mean, they're up there, they dip their bat, they don't know what they're doing, and it's ridiculous because bunting, if you're playing small ball and you want to advance the runner, you have to know how to bunt. And whether it be a pitcher, whether it be your second batter, whatever it is, if your leadoff guy gets on, I know that my dad, 4 times he scored over 100 runs in a season, and one year he led the American League in runs scored. I think he scored 102. And the fact is that he was a leadoff man. He didn't have power. He had to get on base. That was his responsibility. And then the next guy, if he was on first, the next guy was able to get my dad to second, or my dad would steal second, and then the next guy would drive him in. And that was the way the game was played.
Well, I remember,
Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing, Tony, not to interrupt you, but
sure.
The second best bunter on the Yankees to Phil Rizzuto was Mickey Mantle.
Yes.
He was a great drag bunter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From the left side. Yep.
Yes, from the left, exactly.
A left-handed, right? A left-handed hitter has a huge advantage on a drag bunt because he's already taken a step or two toward first base. And if you're a good bunter and you can lay it down, and a lot of good bunters, what they'll do, if the third baseman is playing back or whatever, they'll just drop it along the third base line, and a left-hander like Mantle with great speed, he's already got a 2-step advantage going toward first base.
And Mantle would do it running up the box. It was really something to watch.
Right.
That was a trademark. People don't talk about that with his awesome power. He had probably more power than any of us has
ever seen.
Ever seen. George, did you see Lou Gehrig? You didn't see him play.
No, I did not see him play, but let me tell you a little story. I took batting practice in 1961 at Griffith Stadium, and I happened to be up there, and I was a pretty big, strong guy, and I thought, man, I want to hit one out of here, and I was trying like heck to hit one into the bleachers, never could do it. But then I looked up where Mantle had hit his shot. I mean, it was just unbelievable. If you've ever stood at Griffith Stadium, and probably very few have, I had the good fortune to do that, and to see where Mantle's home run went over the left field wall, glanced off the clock, wound up in the street behind Griffith Stadium, and gave birth to the phrase tape measure home run. I mean, it was just incredible.
Well, anyone who'd been to the old Yankee Stadium could look up and see where Mantle hit the upper edge of the facade. A few more feet over to the left, and that would have been out of Yankee Stadium.
That would have been.
You just had to look up. It was awesome. Yeah,
I was at that game.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that was another example of Mantle's power. I mean, it was incredible. He had such great foot speed, but his power, and then of course he hurt his leg in that episode with DiMaggio and never was the same.
Yeah, first season.
But when he first came up, I mean, he was blessed because he had that great power and tremendous speed. So, one other Yankee, and while you're talking about the Yankees, and Gene would verify this, would be Ricky Henderson. I mean, there was a leadoff guy who had great speed, could drive you crazy. But on the other hand, he had tremendous power as well. So that was, a lot of leadoff hitters, had great speed but didn't have power. Where Ricky Henderson had both.
Yeah. Well, Trey Turner of the Nats has tremendous speed, and they've moved him to the leadoff batter, and I think they're going to keep him there in the leadoff spot this year again because of his tremendous speed. So, in fact, a friend of mine was watching a game who's a big baseball fan, has seen many, many games, and an old New York Giants fan, and he called me one day and he said, I just saw something I've never seen in baseball before. Turner hit a shot to the shortstop. Shortstop was playing kind of deep, but and he beat it out. He beat out the throw from the shortstop to first base on a routine play.
Yeah.
With a good throw.
I remember when Rizzuto was hired by Steinbrenner to come to spring training and teach Ricky Henderson how to bunt. And Ricky Henderson didn't know who he was. He said, "Oh yeah, you're the guy on that when they start playing that Italian music and they show those old films. Yeah, I recognize you on the jumbotron." Anyway, Phil's trying to teach Ricky how to bunt, so there's a spring training game going on. And Phil's up in the booth, and Ricky's trying to get a bunt down, and Phil is freaking out. He's saying, "I don't know about this. That man Steinbrenner's going to fire me if this keeps going on." And it was so natural, Phil. It was hysterical, but he's trying to teach Ricky how to bunt, and he couldn't do
it. You know what? That's a good point. I mean, I don't even think in the old days they used to play Pepper. And Pepper really, taught you bat control and how to push the ball either right side, left side, whatever. Yeah. I don't even think they play Pepper anymore. And you can really see it. Yeah, you can really see it when you have these players that get up there and they're waving the bat around and they're not squared around properly. And when I was a kid, we were always taught let the ball hit the bat. And today they're diving at the ball, they're dipping their bat, they're fouling it off, they're popping it up. It's a lost art, and we always talk about the DH in the American League, no DH in the National League. Well, but, people say, we don't like to see pitchers hit. But on the other hand, there are good hitting pitchers, but also pitchers can help their cause if they know how to bunt. And you come up in a situation where you have a runner on second, or you want to advance that runner, and you know how to bunt, and he's a pitcher. That pitcher doesn't have to get a base hit. All he has to do is advance the runner. And one of the easiest ways to do it, if they're not a good hitter, is to be able to bunt.
And that's what made not having a DH so much better than having a DH. And I'm going to respond to something George said maybe a week or two ago, where you said, I think in the future both leagues are going to have the DH. And I just wanted to tell you, that stuck with me. I didn't say anything. That saddens me.
It saddens me, Ralph. I just happen to think that that's what's going to happen. I mean, some people say,
I happen to think it's going to be true, and that's why I'm equally saddened by that. George, did your dad ever use the expression, catch the ball with the bat, try to soften the bat to catch it?
That's what I was taught. I mean, I was taught, you wait and you cushion with your hand, and you don't go diving for the ball. If the ball's up, you raise your bat up. If the ball's down, you raise but you catch the ball with the bat. That's the way bunters were taught. And when you're able to do that and you have some bat control, if you want to, if you see the first baseman is playing back or you see the third baseman playing back, you are able to push the ball either to the right side or left side. That's the way you're taught to taught to bunt properly as a youngster, and that would carry over. I don't think today, I doubt whether many players, coaches spend much time teaching a player how to bunt properly.
I would
Do
agree.
you think some of it is? The fact that a lot of players do not bunt or stand in a terrible position has to do with the speed that some of these pitchers can throw it at them.
Just going to add 98 miles an hour. Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think so, David. But on the other hand, there were pitchers. I mean, Feller, Walter Johnson.
Sure.
I mean, Nolan Ryan, Seaver, whatever. I mean, they were great fastball. But if you learn how to bunt properly, if that ball's coming to 98 or 100, whatever it is, you can still deaden it.
Right.
By dropping it down to the first or third base line, the way you cushion it. If you're diving after the ball, or if a guy is afraid and he's up there with 2 strikes, he might want to swing. But in the old days, if you were a good bunter, I'm telling you, third strike on bunt, that foul ball would be an out. But a lot of guys would bunt with 2 strikes if they were a good bunter. That's just the way the game was played.
Yeah, I always thought that you move the bat in the same direction of the ball. You don't push the bat toward the pitcher's mouth.
Exactly.
You've got to push it back so it meets the ball and is moving in the same plane. And I was taught that if you use your right hand, because I was a right hand hitter, if you use your right hand as a swivel and use your left hand to sort of decide which part of the field you wanted the ball to go to, and as you moved it back, that was bat control. I mean, that was really how you could get the ball to the part of the field you wanted it to go to.
Well, you can, David, and again, that's small ball. If you've got guys that are, hitting home runs and the stadiums today are a heck of a lot smaller than they were playing field. I mean, the left field, right field line of most of the stadiums, they are like 335 or whatever it is, but guys can reach the stands. But in the older days, if you didn't have power, you had to have, base running, small ball, good defense, speed. But the players that had to, if you're a leadoff hitter, a second hitter, whatever, your responsibility, or if you're a pitcher and the situation required it, you had to know how to bunt. And that's just the way they played it. Now, I'm not saying that
in batting practice, you'd have to bunt 2 first.
Yeah, exactly. Tony, that's what we did. We used to, when we were taking batting practice, you'd take the first 2, you would bunt to the first base side, bunt to the third base side, and then start to swing. That's the way we learned.
By the way, you talked about Pepper. I can recall going to some games here where there were signs right behind the batter's boxes, no pepper allowed.
No pepper.
Now, I was going to ask, how did that come in?
I can't understand that. David, Ralph, Gary, Gene, maybe you guys know. I have no idea why they put that in there.
Yeah, well, you don't see them now, but I do remember seeing them for a number of years, and you wonder why. I mean, in your films, George, you see the players playing pepper before the games. Yeah,
they did all the time. That was a very popular way to loosen up, and the players loved it, because they learned how to bunt. But it also, gave you a chance to use your muscles, and the players played pepper constantly. When I was a kid,
have you guys seen the old Gas House Gang?
Right.
Yeah, with the tricks and the.
Oh yeah, the ball around and over. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. That's exactly right. They were playing Pepper. It was Pepper Martin, and maybe that's where his name came from. I don't know, but they were playing Pepper, and that's the way Major League players for years. Before a game, if you ever went to a Major League ball game before they were taking batting practice and that kind of thing, but before they were doing that, they were loosening up by playing Pepper.
Playing Pepper.
Hey, maybe the name Pepper came from Pepper Martin.
It very well could have been, Ralph. I don't really know where it came from, but I just know that was one of the first games that I learned to play when I was playing, and that came from my dad. My dad said, "Come on, we're going to go out and play Pepper." And that's what it was.
Remember the Reds in the 70s? They had that Jamaican ball player, Ed Armbruster. His job was purely sacrifice bunting. That was it. I mean, that was the reason why they had him on the team. He could lay one down. That play in the 1975 World Series where it was probably interference with Carlton Fisk, but maybe not, and Armbruster was the bunter.
Right.
And he moved the runner.
The 1955 World Series. The 1955 World Series. Does anybody remember how the Dodgers got their second run in 1955? Three single, Duke Snyder and Roy Campanella both bunted, and then Gil Hodges hit the sacrifice fly. I mean, Snyder and Campanella bunting was like, if you talk about that.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Gene. You have players like that. I'm sure if you ever told a big star today, a big home run hitter, hey, you're going to bunt, they'd look at you were crazy and say, no way.
Yeah.
My guy was Ken Boyer.
I remember.
I just grabbed off my shelf the Dixon Baseball Dictionary, which is my Bible for arcane terminology, and he's got a whole column on pepper. And according to Paul, the first mention came, as he could find, was 1895. And he talks about it being a fast-paced pregame bunting and fielding drill among small clusters of players. He notices in the second grade, he says most ballparks now have no pepper or no pepper game signed, stenciled on the infield walls.
I don't, but why would they discontinue that? It was entertaining to the fans.
Yeah, I know.
Were they afraid of losing a few balls into the stands?
Yeah, I don't understand it. I have no idea why that is.
No, and I don't think this one. I'm looking, as quickly as I can here. I just don't understand why they put those signs up, or why they no longer allow without the signs. As he says, it's very popular among players, and that goes back.
David, let me ask you something. Since you've got that in front of you, did Paul Dixon, who I know, did he tell you in that where the name came from, or just what the name was?
Yeah, I'm looking for it. The term would appear to derive from pep, as well as the peppy or peppery nature of the game, which in turn appears to be a derivative of pepper, to give the term a circular etymology. Both these adjectives were fairly common in ballpark expressions before World War II. Two examples from Maurice Wesson's 1934 Dictionary of American Slang are peppery grasser, that's a hit ball that is low and swift, and peppery pilot, a lively, aggressive manager of a team. So,
okay. So I guess it didn't come from Pepper Martin then. So.
No, I guess not. No. But it might have come the other way. I mean,
yeah, right.
I would have been astonished if the original name of Pepper was Martin.
Yeah. Let's go play Martin.
No, that was an Italian saloon singer.
A different Martin, and quite a saloon singer Dino was, I might add.
Right.
Big ball fan.
In those days, celebrities, Jackie Gleason, I remember, and Frank Sinatra were Giant fans. Phil Foster was a Dodger fan.
Oh, yeah. He had a whole routine on the Dodgers. He used to do it on the Ed Sullivan show. Oiskin.
Let me refer to the fact you guys mentioned small ball versus long ball. The rivalry that the 60s Giants and Dodgers had really shows that very clearly. I mean, you'd have Willie Davis and Wills getting on, bunting, sacrifice fly, move them over, one-run scores, Koufax wins the game, that kind of thing. And if you want to hear something that's whimsical and interesting along those lines, is that Danny Kaye did this thing about the Giants and Dodgers. I can't remember what it's entitled, but Hiller bunts to Miller, Miller throws to Hiller, that kind of
yeah.
stuff. And that's on YouTube, so you can pick that up. And but the Giants-Dodger rivalry was all based on long ball versus short ball or small ball. There you go.
Well, it's a different game, and I just want to mention one other thing. I don't want to belabor the point, but now you bring up a name like Danny Kaye and Hollywood entertainers and all. I have a photograph, 1966, my dad presenting a Hawaiian Islanders baseball cap to Danny Kaye, who was one of the part owners. And I think Tony D'Angelo mentioned this to me not too long ago. Danny Kaye was one of the part owners of the Hawaii Islanders and also was a part owner of the Seattle Mariners.
Seattle Mariners, yeah. Huge baseball guy.
Right.
Loved baseball. He followed DeRocher wherever DeRocher went.
Yep.
Incredibly entertaining guy.
Amazing.
What was it, 5 Easy Pieces? Or not 5, that was a Nicholson thing. Danny Kaye had some sort of musical comedy movie out. Besides Hans Christian Andersen, which was unbelievably iconic to a kid growing up in those days. All the stories from Hans Christian Andersen about you think you can make it, you can make it, We don't have that anymore. We don't have positive affirmations for kids in
we do not.
Day and age. As a matter of fact, let me just put it bluntly. Our society is going right into the toilet. That's an editorial comment. It doesn't reflect the belief of the other 5 panelists, but it certainly does mine.
Hello?
So, and maybe it does. Maybe it does. Okay, we're going to go around the room, and everybody's going to complete their thoughts, so we don't slight anybody. I'm going to start with Gene Hutmaker. Anything you want to complete the thought before?
Well, just in my cardinal vein is that Pepper Martin in 1931, he had such a great World Series that he was the AP Male Athlete of the Year.
Whoa. Pepper Martin was.
He had such a great World Series.
Well, Gene, let's do a little Pepper Martin thing. Most baseball fans included know very little about the Gas House Gang and Pepper Martin. So next week when we get together for the Cardinal show, we'll do a Gas House Gang show. How about that?
Sounds great.
Okay, good. You're very agreeable these days, Gene. Why is it?
Because we're not talking about the Yankees.
Okay.
There you go, Gene.
All right. David Hubler, complete your thoughts for the day, if you would.
Oh, I just lost all my train of thought because I was going to say something good about the Yankees. So we'll wait till next week. I'm finished. I'm done.
All right. George Case III.
Hey, I've always enjoyed these kind of conversations about baseball and history, and I always like having this kind of panel, and we can reminisce and talk about baseball the way it used to be.
Nice. Now, our guest of honor, Tony D'Angelo, my godfather. My godfather.
Oh, you're very kind. I will say this to memorialize that you mentioned Phil Foster. In 1963, not 1962, but just 1963, Phil Foster had a pregame show for the Met games called Phil Foster's Clubhouse, where he would have people on and they'd reminisce about old Dodger and Giant games, and they would act out skits and tell jokes and things like that. And it was off and away to the Met game, but that was I never knew that Phil Foster was anything at all other than the guy who did Phil Foster's Clubhouse until he showed up as Laverne DeFazio's father in Laverne and Shirley. So that's my experience with Phil Foster.
There you go. Nice going there, Tony.
Tony, if you could always work it around to bring an Italian name into it. I don't know how you do that. I almost have to come up with something Yiddish, but It's too early in the afternoon on a yontif to think of anything, so I'll just close the show by thanking you all for getting together with me and talking ball of any kind. I'm very, very appreciative. I want to ask the audii, if they would, to, if they enjoy any of our offerings on the network, to box up some lightly used children's books and take them to the Head Start program in the community in which you reside. There's always one, and they're always looking to get kids reading, to get them a passion, to just encourage them to be school ready. You got to read to go to school, and
yes.
It would be very, very appreciated by me personally if you would do that. And you can get neighborhood things together, and you can use bookstores to donate books. It's a whole bunch of things you can do. But however you decide to do it, just get the kids some books. That would be great, and I'd appreciate that. I want to thank all you guys for being here, and we'll be back next week, same time, same station. Mr. David Hubler is going to remain on the line, and I'm going to push a few buttons, and we'll see you next week, guys.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye,
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Listen. Adios.